Hi, Bunreacht here. Sorry, I just wanted to do another take on this point here, and it's following a kind of a three in a row, a trilogy of papers that myself and Miss Murray Kenny have co-authored and worked together on. And so this is just a point that's raised in that paper, and I'll give some details of that paper in a post there later on. So I'm just asking the question there following the video yesterday. Is there a blind spot in Ireland's presidential elections systems? We'll call it system. I'll call it like that. So it's about what happens when a constitutional question can be raised in good faith, or constitutional questions, but there is no moment when any institution can actually answer it. And I want to talk about whether that may now be happening structurally in Ireland's presidential elections systems. Most of us assume something very simple. If something important is unconstitutional, of course, nothing is constitutional otherwise unless declared so by the court, but it was believed or perceived or to be unconstitutional, that a court should look at it or can look at it. But constitutions don't live on paper. They live inside systems, timelines, procedures, institutions. Presidential elections are highly protected. Stability and continuity matter. Now, continuity is, I suppose, in this sense, is that everything goes smoothly. You know, that there's no major disruption in the matter. Everything runs smoothly. But I mean, if it doesn't, what can you do? But protection can sometimes create unintended consequence, or undue restraint. The issue is that courts, not that courts refuse to hear cases, is that the system may never create a moment when hearing them is possible. And that's the system is everything, I suppose, the whole architecture together. So political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution when it comes to presidential nominations. But in real life, parties influence councillors and TDs, not unlawfully, not secretly, sent through political reality. But constitutionals, once the presidential order has been issued, become constitutional actors. But they also live in live party systems. This creates tension. But the Constitution assumes independence. Politics assumes loyalty. And perhaps the system this time didn't give a councillors a safe place to ask which one comes first. However, it seems to me that once party members who are private members of a private political party move into their constitutional role, they then are duty bound to assume the independence first. In other words, they have to behave as constitutional actors, and that is their primary responsibility in that constitutional role. So that's a very subtle but extremely important point here. So and that's where we're saying that the directive, the Fine Gael directive, after the presidential order, is statistically, by the best statistical analysis that I can find, beyond reasonable doubt, proves mathematically that the fact that nobody came through the system was directly correlated, or the chances of it not being correlated were absolutely minimal as a result of the Fine Gael block when it actually happened. So some legal issues don't arise at the start of elections, is the other point. They arise very late when ballot papers are prepared, and this would be, this is kind of what can happen. At that point, courts can be understandably reluctant to intervene. So courts can be reluctant to intervene if issues arise say, after ballot papers are prepared. So, and in particular, the closer you get to polling day, the harder it becomes to fix anything, even if that issue is narrow, technical, and extremely important, constitutionally. Now, one of the problems that myself and Mr. Byrne had is that we went to the court as soon as we could with our constitutional questions, two of which included did the bloc interfere in such a way that it annihilated the independent route, which is the second route, completely, so that it interfered with Article 12 materially, and then making that unlawful, that directive, making that directive unlawful, and then was the consequent election process also unlawful as a result of the unlawfulness of the nomination process. And both of us asked the court to adjudicate on both issues, in particular to pause the election until all these matters were resolved, were resolved. And on both counts, we were both, one was adjudicated as non-justicable, which I completely disagree with. Looking at the case, it was evident to me that Mr. Byrne had a very strong argument, and my case was deemed a personal grievance, and certainly it was not a personal grievance. I was just one of many with the exact same grievance. So I could have been. It was not unique to me. Absolutely, it was reframed as a personal grievance. But the worst of it was then the judgment in my case was moved to the day before, the eve of the presidential. So the judgment then, was framed in such a way that it went from very serious constitutional questions to one which was sidelined constitutionally completely, and then the judgment which alarmed me completely. As I was just stunned. It looked like it was just totally kind of gaslighted. It didn't look like it was it looked like it came from a different case. And that was represented as the truth down to the press. So I call that reframing, reclassification, and it is known to be a tactic, a strategy that's used to shut down constitutional cases, and it is a narrowing of the separation of powers. So it is. In 2 or 4 cases, it seems to me that this has happened, that there has been highlighted a cluster and a sequencing together, which I have authored papers on, which really point to a significant narrowing in the separation of powers. And it can't be unique to these 4 cases, but it does, over time, erode democracy in a huge way. So this is why I'm saying we need to stand up for the separation of powers, and we need to start talking about it and having a conversation about it and understanding how important it is for democracy that separation of powers is kept as wide as it can be rather than narrowed, given the impression, even in this case, where understandably restrained conflict of interest, there could be a number of different issues, but like the fact that my case was moved, was back there, and Mr. Niall Burns was further behind me, and then they didn't wait. He wasn't allowed to have his case until, within a short time of so it was almost like it was engineered, so that the outcomes were predetermined, which really is a really poor signal for the depth of the separation of powers. And this is very, very serious. Now, that's the impression or the perception. It may not be the reality. The reality may have been just the political position that people take, that you can't interfere. But if there's a genuine constitutional question to be answered, I think that has to be prioritised. It's the balance of convenience. And I feel the balance of convenience question was something that I raised repeatedly at the, in the oral hearing, that was never mentioned, as far as I could see, in the reframed case and the consequent reframed judgment, allegedly. So while I can understand judicial restraint, it does exist for good reasons. Courts must protect democracy, not destabilize it. But if you overprotect it, if you do so to the extent of kind of turning a blind eye to very serious alleged constitutional errors, then I think in that way, you destabilize it rather than protect democracy. So that's where I'm coming from. But restraints can have side effects. If every institution steps back at the same time, constitutional questions don't get answers, they disappear. This is about institutional silence, and collectively, it's very significant if it's across all of the elements in the architecture or in the system. What worries what is of worry is not losing cases, it's losing the ability to be heard at all. So this is why I greatly welcome, this is why I greatly welcome the Court of Appeal's decision to hear at least one particular aspect of Mr. Niall Byrne's Supreme Court submission, as I understand it. But a constitution is not fully alive if some questions can never be decided, no matter how carefully they are raised. Legality should be established, not presumed. So the conversation isn't about undoing elections, it's about strengthening public trust. Strong democracies are not afraid of review. They make space for it. And asking whether our system still does that respectfully, carefully, is not radical. It's actually constitutional citizenship. This video discusses constitutional structure and institutional design, and that's really where we're at. So that's my second video. Wishing you all a very happy 2026. I just had a relative on there saying that she was hoping that her 2026 would be